My name is Elaine Mercer. I'm 52 years old, and on Christmas Eve last year, my younger brother looked me in the eye through a frosted glass front door and pretended he didn't know me. I was still holding the pumpkin pie. The whipped cream had started sliding off one side because my hands were shaking so badly from the cold. It was one of those aluminum grocery store tins with the clear plastic lid that never snaps on properly. I remember that stupid detail because while everything else in my life cracked open that night, that lid somehow stayed perfectly attached. There were lights hanging from the gutters of the house I had helped pay for, warm white lights, the expensive kind, not the tangled multicolor ones our mother used to buy at Walgreens after Christmas when they went on clearance. I stood there in my wool coat while my brother Tyler deadbolted the door from the inside, not slammed it, not argued. Just calmly turned the lock while his wife stared at me from behind him with her arms folded, and no one inside said a word. Not Tyler, not his wife Candace, not my nephews, not even the dog that used to lose its mind every time I pulled into the driveway. I remember hearing Bing Crosby playing somewhere in the house while snow started, soaking through the toes of my boots. That was the moment I realized something I should have understood years earlier. People can accept your sacrifices for so long that they stop seeing them as sacrifices at all. They start seeing them as rent. I wish I could tell you I screamed at him, that I pounded on the door or threw the pie across the porch like something from a movie. But I didn't. I just stood there, because humiliation is strangely quiet. Especially when it arrives wearing Christmas lights. I drove away 15 minutes later after finally accepting he wasn't reopening the door. My windshield wipers pushed wet snow across the glass while voicemail after voicemail went unanswered. Tyler had texted me 2 hours earlier saying, "Dinner at 6, don't be late this time lol." That lol kept replaying in my head all the way home. I pulled into my apartment complex around 8:30. The parking lot was half empty because everyone else was somewhere warm with people who wanted them there. My upstairs neighbor, Mr. Gutierrez, was smoking beside the stair rail in a Santa hat his granddaughter had probably forced him to wear. He looked at me carrying the untouched pie and said softly, "Everything okay, Elaine?" And for some reason that nearly broke me more than the lock, because strangers can hear pain before family does. I told him I was tired. That was the word I used. Tired, not betrayed, not humiliated, just tired. Inside my apartment, the radiator clicked like loose teeth while I set the pie on the kitchen counter and took off my gloves. My fingers were red and stiff. There was a small crack in one thumbnail from gripping the steering wheel too hard. I stared at my phone for nearly an hour waiting for Tyler to call back. He didn't. At 9:14. Candace finally texted me. "Tyler thinks it's best if you give us some space for a while." Space. After 6 years of mortgage payments, after 6 years of temporary help, after 6 years of hearing, "just until we get back on our feet," I sat down at my kitchen table and laughed, not because anything was funny. Because sometimes your body refuses to process cruelty like a normal event. Sometimes it reacts the way people react when they narrowly avoid a car accident. A strange, breathless laugh because the alternative is falling apart completely. I opened my banking app. I don't know why I did that. Maybe because numbers feel safer than emotions. Numbers are clean. Numbers don't rewrite history, and there it was. 72 separate transfers, mostly $1,840 each, sometimes more, never less, 6 years. I had paid my brother's mortgage every single month since 2017. I was a respiratory therapist at St. Catherine's Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, during the pandemic while people baked sourdough bread and complained online about being stuck inside. I worked 16-hour shifts in a plastic face shield until the skin behind my ears bled. Tyler used to call me crying during those years. "Elaine, I don't know what we're gonna do. Elaine, the boys need stability. Elaine, if we lose this house, Candace will never forgive me." And I believed him because Tyler had always sounded fragile in a way that made people protect him. Even as a kid, he knew how to stand in the wreckage of his own decisions and somehow look like the victim. Meanwhile, I became the dependable one, the unmarried one, the one without children, which family members often translate into, the one whose money matters less. Nobody says that out loud, of course. They say things like, "You're just helping family, you're in a better position than they are, you've always been generous, but generosity without boundaries is just slow self-destruction with good manners." I know that now. Back then, I thought love meant preventing the people you care about from drowning. I didn't realize some people eventually hand you the anchor. Around midnight, I finally noticed the framed photograph sitting beside my bookshelf. It was from Tyler's housewarming party years earlier. Me, Tyler, Candace, and the boys standing in front of the house, everybody smiling. Candace had insisted I get in the picture even though I'd shown up late from work still wearing hospital scrubs under my coat. "You helped make this happen," she'd said. At the time, those words felt sincere. Now they sounded like a confession. I got up and pulled open the drawer where I kept old paperwork, tax returns, insurance forms, receipts, the boring documents people ignore until life turns ugly. Because there was something Tyler didn't know. Something I never told anyone. Not even him. Back in 2018, after the third mystery payment promise and the second temporary setback, I had quietly done something one of my coworkers suggested during a late-night cafeteria conversation. At the time I told myself it was only precautionary, insurance, nothing more. But sitting there alone on Christmas Eve with snow falling outside my apartment window and my brother pretending I didn't exist, I realized that single decision might be the only reason he hadn't destroyed me completely, and the moment I found the document I understood exactly why Tyler had locked me out before dinner even started, because he knew I'd eventually find out what he'd done. The first time Tyler asked me for money, he cried before I could even answer the phone properly. I was sitting in my car outside St. Catherine's after a 12-hour shift, still wearing scrubs that smelled faintly like antiseptic and coffee. It was February of 2017, one of those gray Ohio winters where everything looks exhausted. My windshield was coated in dirty slush from the parking garage, and I remember staring at it while Tyler tried to breathe through whatever panic he was feeling. "Elaine," he said, voice cracking, "I think we're gonna lose the house." At that point, the house wasn't even technically theirs yet. Tyler and Candace had closed on it 3 months earlier in a suburb called Blacklick, east of Columbus. It wasn't extravagant, just a beige two-story with a narrow front porch and a fenced backyard for the boys. Tyler worked in regional sales for a flooring company then, and Candace had recently stopped teaching after their younger son developed asthma problems. Everybody in the family talked about that house like it represented something larger than itself. Stability, success, a fresh start. Our mother cried the first time she saw it. "You kids never had a backyard growing up," she'd whispered while watching Tyler's sons chase each other across the grass. What nobody talked about was how close Tyler had stretched himself financially to get it. He'd drained his savings for the down payment, maxed out to credit cards buying furniture that looked more expensive than it was. Bought a used Lexus because Candace thought clients respected appearances. Tyler always cared too much about appearances. Even as teenagers, he'd spend grocery money on sneakers then charm our mother into forgiving him. But charm doesn't stop mortgage payments. 3 months after moving in, his company downsized, commission structure changed. Half his territory disappeared overnight. And suddenly my younger brother, the boy who once convinced an entire neighborhood he'd broken his arm just to avoid mowing the lawn, sounded genuinely terrified. "There. Giving us 30 days before penalties start," he said quietly. "I just need help for a month or two." A month or two. That phrase lasted 6 years. At first it felt simple. I had savings, no children, no husband. My apartment rent was manageable, and respiratory therapists were getting overtime constantly back then because hospitals never had enough staff. I wired him the first payment the next morning, $1,840. Tyler called me crying again afterward. "You saved us," he kept saying. Candace mailed me a handwritten thank you card with the boys' signatures at the bottom in crooked pencil. Looking back now, I think that card is what trapped me, because gratitude is powerful in the beginning. It makes sacrifice feel noble. The second payment came 2 months later after Tyler claimed they were still catching up, then another after Candace needed emergency dental surgery, then another because the transmission died in Tyler's Lexus. Every crisis sounded believable on its own. That's the dangerous thing about being slowly used. Nothing happens all at once. It happens in small, reasonable installments. By the end of 2017, I had paid nearly $11,000 toward their mortgage. Tyler promised constantly that things were turning around. "I'm interviewing next week, we're refinancing soon, tax returns coming." And every time he spoke, I heard my little brother instead of a grown man making irresponsible decisions. I think that matters, because people always ask afterward, "How didn't you see it?" But love changes your eyesight. You explain things away because the alternative feels too painful. Over time, helping Tyler became woven into my routine so deeply that I stopped evaluating it emotionally. On the first of every month, I transferred money. Sometimes before he even asked, I'd get paid Friday morning, buy groceries Saturday. Send Tyler the mortgage money Sunday night, like clockwork, like obligation. Like oxygen. Meanwhile, Tyler's life kept looking strangely comfortable for someone supposedly drowning. That should have been my first real warning. Not the expensive grill appearing on the back patio. Not the family vacation to Hilton Head they claimed was mostly covered by points. Not Candace's salon appointments or Tyler's obsession with replacing perfectly functional televisions. It was the kitchen island, a stupid quartz kitchen island. I remember visiting one Saturday afternoon in late 2018 while contractors installed it. The boys were eating popsicles in the living room, and Candace was excitedly showing me samples of backsplash tile. "It increases resale value," she said cheerfully. Resale value. I stood there staring at an island that probably cost half my yearly grocery budget while my checking accounts at perpetually anxious from covering their mortgage. Tyler noticed me looking. "It was discounted," he said quickly. Then he laughed and added, "Don't give me that hospital budget stare." That's what he called it whenever I looked concerned about money. The hospital budget stare, like caution was a personality flaw. Still, I said nothing, because by then I was emotionally invested in the idea that I was helping keep a family together. The boys started calling my visits Aunt Elaine Saturdays. I'd bring groceries or pizza or little things they mentioned casually weeks earlier. A baseball glove, a science kit, winter boots. Tyler always made a point of hugging me in front of them. Your aunt's the reason we still have this house, he'd say. At the time it sounded appreciative. Now I realize it also trained everyone to expect my sacrifice as permanent. The pandemic changed everything, though I didn't see it immediately. In 2020, while hospitals filled beyond capacity and refrigerated trucks sat outside emergency rooms, I became useful in a completely different way. Financially useful. I worked overtime. Constantly because respiratory therapists were desperately needed. My paychecks grew larger than they'd ever been, but so did my exhaustion. There were nights I sat in my car after shifts too tired to drive home immediately. Tyler started calling more during those years. Not to ask how I was doing, to update me on bills. We're behind again. Candace had to stop tutoring. The boys need laptops for school. One night after losing a patient barely older than Tyler, I sat in the hospital stairwell listening to him explain why they needed another $3,000, and I gave it to him. Because grief weakens boundaries. Because when you spend all day watching strangers die, your family's problems start feeling solvable by comparison. But small things kept bothering me. Candace posting photos of backyard renovations online, Tyler upgrading to a newer Lexus. The boys attending expensive summer baseball camps. Meanwhile, I postponed replacing my own aging car for 3 straight years. I told myself family required sacrifice. What I didn't understand yet was this. Healthy sacrifice eventually moves in both directions. Exploitation only moves one way, the first person who ever questioned. The arrangement directly was my friend Denise from the hospital. We were eating microwaved soup in the cafeteria around 2 in the morning when I mentioned wiring Tyler another payment. Denise stopped stirring her coffee. You're on the mortgage paperwork, right? She asked. I blinked at her. What paperwork? She stared at me for a long moment. Elaine. You've paid their mortgage for years. They're my family. That's not what I asked. I remember feeling defensive immediately, almost embarrassed, like she'd accused Tyler of something cruel and I needed to protect him. He's paying me back eventually. Denise didn't argue. She just reached into her purse, pulled out a napkin and wrote down the name of a real estate attorney. People change when houses are involved, she said quietly. Protect yourself before gratitude expires. I almost threw that napkin away. Instead, 3 weeks later, after another mystery payment promise from Tyler, I made an appointment during my lunch break. The attorney's office smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. His name was Leonard Kaplan, and he looked exactly like someone who spent 40 years dealing with family disputes nobody thought would become legal. Disputes. After reviewing 6 months of bank transfers, he leaned back in his chair. You've essentially been acting like an undisclosed financial partner, he said. I hated how cold that sounded. Partner, not sister, not helper, not family, just financial partner. Mr. Kaplan asked me a question I still remember word for word. If your brother died tomorrow, he said, what exactly would you own? The answer was nothing. Not legally, not officially, nothing. That realization sat in my stomach like spoiled milk all the way home. So eventually, quietly without telling Tyler, I signed paperwork Mr. Kaplan recommended. Nothing aggressive, nothing designed to hurt anyone, just documentation, a protection measure connected to the property itself, insurance, at least that's what I called it in my head, and for years afterward I almost forgot it existed. Until the week before Christmas last year, because that was when Tyler accidentally said something during a phone call that made every warning sign I'd ignored suddenly rearrange itself into something horrifying, something deliberate. And once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. The phone call happened 4 days before Christmas while I was standing in the clearance aisle at Target holding a set of pajama pants for my younger nephew, Noah. Tyler had called asking whether I could come earlier than usual on Christmas Eve because Candace wanted help setting up before guests arrived. Guests, that word caught my attention immediately because Tyler's Christmas dinners were always small. Just immediate family. Me, Mom when she was still alive, Candace's parents occasionally, the boys. Who's coming? I asked. There was a pause long enough for me to hear shopping carts rattling nearby. Oh, Tyler said casually, just some people. Some people. Then I heard Candace in the background, ask her if she can park on the street this time. Something inside me tightened, not because of the parking comment itself but because of the tone, the familiarity. Like they'd already discussed me before Tyler called. Why can't I use the driveway? I asked lightly, another pause. The driveway's full. I remember staring at a display of discounted wrapping paper while every instinct I'd ignored for years started tapping on the inside of my ribs. Then Tyler laughed awkwardly. You know how Candace gets when people are coming over. People, again, Not family, not dinner, people. I asked who they were one more time and Tyler finally answered. A realtor. The word hit me so suddenly I thought I'd misheard him. A realtor? Relax, he said quickly. We're just exploring options. Options. My fingers went numb around the pajama pants. What options? Tyler lowered his voice then, the way people do when they know they're about to say something they shouldn't. We might sell in spring if the market stays good. For a second, all I could hear was the buzzing fluorescent lights above me. Sell. After 6 years of me paying the mortgage, after 6 years of temporary help, I walked blindly toward the back of the store and stopped near seasonal decorations because I suddenly couldn't breathe properly. You're selling the house? I asked carefully. It's not finalized, Tyler. We need a fresh start, Elaine. Not once during that conversation did he mention repaying me, not once, and that was the moment every strange detail from the past 6 years clicked together with terrifying clarity. The vacations, the renovations, the expensive purchases, the endless delays whenever I mentioned repayment. He had never seen the money as a loan. He had seen it as access to a life he couldn't afford alone. I leaned against a shelf of artificial wreaths and asked the question that should have been obvious years earlier. How much equity do you have in the house now? Silence. Then Tyler said quietly, why are you talking like this? Not because he was confused, because he was scared. That's an important distinction. I drove home without buying anything. That night, I pulled out every bank statement I could find, every transfer, every text message where Tyler promised repayment. There were hundreds. I'll make this right, just until next quarter. You know I'd do the same for you. That last one hurt the most because we both knew it wasn't true. Tyler had never once done the same for me. Not when I needed surgery in 2019 and spent 2 weeks recovering alone in my apartment. Not when my car transmission failed. Not when Mom died and I handled nearly every funeral expense because Tyler claimed money was tight while wearing a watch that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. The truth had been sitting in front of me for years. I just kept dressing it up as loyalty. The next morning I called Leonard Kaplan for the first time in almost 4 years. He remembered me immediately, which honestly felt humiliating. Like my situation was predictable enough to be memorable. After I explained the possible sale, he asked one question. Have you checked the county records recently? I hadn't. By noon, I wished I still hadn't, because Tyler and Candace had quietly listed the house for sale 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks before inviting me to Christmas dinner, before Tyler called pretending everything was normal. The listing photos made me physically ill. The renovated kitchen, the backyard fire pit, the staged family room with the expensive leather sectional I'd indirectly helped finance. There was even a sentence in the description that read, lovingly maintained family home. I sat staring at those words while anger spread through me slowly, almost calmly, not explosive anger, the kind that arrives after humiliation finally burns away confusion. The house was listed at $489,000, according to Kaplan. The equity sitting inside it was substantial, and Tyler had planned to walk away with all of it, without telling me, without repaying me, without even warning me. That's when I finally understood why he invited me over Christmas Eve anyway. Guilt, not love. People do strange things when they know they're betraying someone decent. They try to create one last normal memory before the damage arrives, as if kindness at the final hour can soften dishonesty that lasted years. Kaplan asked me to bring every financial record I had to his office after the holiday. I'm not promising anything, he said carefully, but you may have stronger legal standing than your brother realizes. For the first time in days, I slept a little, not peacefully, but differently, like my grief had finally located its spine. Christmas Eve arrived gray and bitterly cold, the kind of Ohio cold that settles into your joints. I spent the afternoon baking the pumpkin pie from scratch because Noah always complained store-bought filling tasted too slippery. Even then, some pathetic part of me still wanted the evening to feel normal. I wrapped presents carefully. Baseball cards for Noah, headphones for Ethan, Candace's favorite peppermint bark from the specialty candy shop near the hospital, and Tyler's gift sat in the passenger seat beside me while I drove there through light snow. A leather-bound photo album, pictures of us growing up, because despite everything, some part of me still thought memory could save people. That's the embarrassing truth nobody tells you about betrayal. You keep trying to rescue the relationship long after the other person has started calculating your value differently. When I arrived, the driveway really was full, but not with guests, with 2 unfamiliar SUVs. A realtor's magnetic sign sat on one of the doors. The house looked brighter than usual, candles glowing through windows, garland around the staircase, expensive wreath on the front door. For one irrational second, I actually thought maybe I was overreacting, maybe Tyler planned to explain everything, maybe he intended to repay me after the sale. Maybe then I walked toward the front porch and heard voices inside, laughing, and a woman saying, "The sister has no legal claim, right?" The world stopped, not emotionally, Physically, my body literally froze halfway up the porch steps. Then Tyler answered, "She won't make this ugly." Won't. Not can't. Won't. Like my silence had already been built into his plans. I don't remember knocking. I only remember Candace opening the door halfway and immediately looking horrified to see me standing there. Behind her, the dining table was already set. Crystal glasses, candles, prime rib resting on the kitchen counter. The realtor couple stood awkwardly near the living room pretending not to listen. Tyler walked into the hallway holding a drink, and for the first time in my life my brother looked at me like I was a problem instead of a person. "You weren't supposed to be here yet," he said. "Not hello, not Merry Christmas, that." I looked at him for a long moment, then I asked the only question that mattered. "You were going to sell the house and keep everything?" Candace muttered, "Oh my God." Tyler's entire face changed, not guilty, annoyed, like I had ruined something. "Elaine," he said quietly, "this isn't the time." I remember gripping the pie container so tightly the plastic lid cracked under my thumb. Then when was the time? The realtor couple started gathering their coats immediately. Smart people recognize disasters early. Tyler stepped outside and shut the door behind him. Snowflakes caught in his hair while music played faintly inside the house. "Don't do this tonight," he whispered sharply. "Do what?" "Act crazy. Crazy." There it was. The moment selfish people finally stop pretending you matter. I stared at him for several seconds. Then I asked, "How much were you planning to give me?" Tyler exhaled hard. "We never signed anything, Elaine. We never signed anything." 6 years collapsed into one sentence. And somehow that hurt more than the locked door ever would. I wish I could tell you I had some brilliant response ready when Tyler said those words. "We never signed anything, Elaine." But betrayal doesn't make you eloquent, it makes you tired. I just stood there on his porch while snow collected along the shoulders of my coat and looked at the man I had spent 6 years protecting from consequences. Then I said something very quiet. "Yes, we did." At first, Tyler didn't understand what I meant. I saw it happen in stages across his face. Irritation first, then confusion, then the smallest flicker of concern. "What are you talking about?" I looked past him into the house where Candace was pretending not to watch through the hallway mirror. The paperwork from 2018. Tyler blinked, and suddenly nobody inside that house looked comfortable anymore. That was the moment I knew two things for certain. First, he genuinely believed I had been naive all these years. Second, he had never once imagined I might protect myself. The wind cut across the porch hard enough to sting my cheeks. Somewhere down the block, kids were yelling in the snow while Christmas lights blinked peacefully from neighboring houses. The normalness of everything felt surreal. Tyler lowered his voice immediately. "Don't start threatening me." "I'm not threatening you." "Then what are you doing?" "For the first time all evening," I answered honestly, "I'm finally listening." That seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. Because Tyler understood emotional reactions. He knew how to manipulate guilt, soften tension, redirect blame. But calmness confused him. Calmness meant the performance had stopped working. He glanced back toward the dining room where the realtor couple stood awkwardly holding their coats. "We can talk after the holidays." "No," I said. "You can call my attorney after the holidays." That word hit him hard. Attorney. He stared at me like I'd suddenly become someone unfamiliar. Then his expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "You'd really do this to family?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because selfish people always ask that question after they've already done the damage themselves. I looked at him standing there in a cashmere sweater I'd indirectly helped pay for and realized something painful. Tyler truly believed family loyalty only moved toward him, never away from him. Never back toward the people sacrificing. That's why the next thing he said didn't even sound cruel to him. "You know you don't need the money the way we do, not deserved, needed." As if my entire adult life had been reduced to the fact that I survived responsibly enough to become useful. I remember feeling something inside me go completely still then. Not anger anymore. Clarity. I handed him the leather photo album. "Merry Christmas," I said. Then I walked back to my car while he stood on the porch holding memories. He no longer deserved access to. He didn't follow me. That hurt too. Because part of me still expected him to. I cried exactly once that night. Not dramatically, just suddenly. I was stopped at a red light near East Broad Street when "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" came on the radio, and I started crying so hard I had to pull into a gas station parking lot beside an air pump. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was grief. Grief for every version of my brother I kept trying to preserve long after he stopped existing. The next morning, Tyler called 6 times before noon. I didn't answer. Candace texted me paragraphs about misunderstandings and stress and how Tyler was under pressure. Around 2 o'clock, she finally wrote the only honest sentence in the entire conversation. "We didn't think you'd react like this." Exactly, they didn't think I would react at all. That afternoon I drove downtown to Leonard Kaplan's office carrying 2 cardboard storage boxes filled with records. Bank transfers, screenshots, emails, Christmas cards thanking me for saving the house again. Even old birthday texts where Tyler joked about me being the silent partner. Kaplan spent nearly 3 hours reviewing everything while I sat across from him drinking terrible office coffee from a paper cup. At one point he removed his glasses slowly and said, "Your brother made a very serious mistake." I felt no satisfaction hearing that, only exhaustion. The paperwork Kaplan had me sign back in 2018 was tied to a secured interest connected to the property. Quiet, legal, documented properly through county records. Tyler had clearly forgotten about it because I'd never once mentioned it afterward. Why? Because I didn't want power over him. I wanted protection from exactly this moment. Kaplan explained that if Tyler sold the home without resolving my financial claim, the transaction could become extremely complicated very quickly. The house could not simply disappear into profit anymore, not cleanly, not quietly, not without me. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I finally breathed normally again. But then Kaplan said something I still think about often. "Elaine," he said gently, "you need to prepare yourself emotionally. Cases involving family rarely hurt. Because of the legal process, they hurt because the legal process forces everyone to say the quiet part out loud." He was right. 3 days later, Tyler arrived at my apartment unannounced. Mr. Gutierrez buzzed him up before asking me first because Tyler introduced himself as my brother in this wounded, respectable tone that probably sounded convincing to anyone else. When I opened the door, Tyler looked terrible, not guilty, cornered. There's a difference. He stood in the hallway holding a bakery box from a place I liked. Near the hospital, olive branch pastries, that was Tyler's style. Charm first, accountability later. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. No, he looked genuinely shocked by that. As if boundaries were rude after 6 years of exploitation. People like Tyler survive partly because decent people keep prioritizing politeness over self-protection. He sighed heavily. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I leaned against the doorway and folded my arms. "Am I? You put paperwork on the house without telling me." There it was again. Not, "I took advantage of you." Not, "I owe you money." His complaint was that I protected myself silently while he exploited me loudly. "I helped save your house," I said, repeatedly. "And we appreciated it." Past tense, appreciated, like the debt had somehow expired emotionally because enough time passed. I asked him one question then. "If I'd never discovered the listing, were you ever planning to tell me before closing?" Tyler said nothing. That silence answered everything. The hallway smelled faintly like somebody laundry detergent from downstairs. A television played somewhere through thin apartment walls, real life continuing normally while mine rearranged itself completely. Finally Tyler rubbed his forehead and said, "Candace thinks you hate us now." I stared at him. Not because I hated him, because I suddenly understood he still viewed this entire situation emotionally instead of ethically. He thought the problem was hurt feelings, not theft. "I loved you," I said quietly. "That's why this worked for so long." Tyler's eyes shifted away immediately, and that's when I realized something devastating. He knew, maybe not at first, maybe not entirely. But somewhere along the way, Tyler realized the arrangement had stopped being fair, and he stayed inside it anyway, because it benefited him. That realization finally killed the last protective instinct I had left toward him. Kaplan filed formal notice the following week. The realtor backed out almost immediately afterward. The buyers disappeared next, and suddenly Tyler, the man who once locked me outside in the snow, was calling constantly again. Voicemails, texts, emails, every message more desperate than the last. "Please don't ruin this for the boys. You're embarrassing us. We can work something out." Work something out, after 6 years, after Christmas Eve. After pretending I had no claim at all, I ignored every message except one, the final one, because it wasn't from Tyler, it was from Candace, and what she wrote changed everything. Candace's message arrived at 11:42 on a Tuesday night while I was eating microwaved soup in my apartment kitchen. I almost ignored it. By then, weeks had passed without direct contact between Tyler and me besides the occasional voicemail I never returned. The house listing had been suspended, their realtor withdrew. Kaplan had formally documented my financial claim against the property, and suddenly my brother, the same man who once deadbolted the door while I stood outside in the snow, was acting like family again. Funny how quickly respect returns when consequences arrive. Candace's text was short. "Elaine, I think there are things you don't know. Please call me." I stared at it for a long time before responding, not because I trusted her, because something about the wording felt frightened. We met 2 days later at a coffee shop in Gahanna near the freeway. Middle of the afternoon, mostly empty except for a few retirees and a college student typing furiously beside the window. Candace looked exhausted. No makeup, puffy eyes, fingers wrapped tightly around a paper coffee cup she barely touched. For years I'd blamed her for encouraging Tyler's dependence on me. The renovations, the vacations, the lifestyle inflation disguised as hardship, but sitting across from her that afternoon I realized something uncomfortable. Tyler had been telling both of us different versions of the truth. Candace pulled a folder from her purse almost immediately. "You need to see this," she said quietly. Inside were printed bank statements, credit card records, loan documents. I frowned. "What is this?" Candace swallowed hard. Tyler never stopped getting full commission checks. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "What?" He lied to me too. Then slowly, painfully, the real story emerged. Tyler's income had recovered years earlier. Years, not months, not recently. Years. The financial emergencies never fully stopped because Tyler had quietly accumulated enormous personal debt nobody knew about: gambling apps, sports betting, risky day trading schemes, credit cards hidden from Candace, cash advances. The mortgage money I sent each month had essentially become insulation protecting the rest of his life from collapse. Candace started crying halfway through explaining it. "I thought you knew more than I did," she whispered. "He always said you understood the arrangement. Even hearing that word made me sick." She explained that Tyler panicked after the housing market surged because he saw selling the house as a clean escape route. Pay off debts, start over somewhere cheaper, finally bury the financial disaster he'd hidden from everyone. "And me?" I asked quietly. Candace looked down immediately. "He said eventually enough time would pass that you'd stop asking." I wish I could say that was the moment I hated him. But strangely it wasn't. It was the moment I stopped mourning who I thought he was. Because grief requires hope, and hope finally left the room that afternoon. Candace slid one final document toward me, a recent loan application Tyler had submitted. In the section listing debts and obligations, there was no mention of me, not my payments, not the money owed, nothing. 6 years erased with a blank space. I drove home afterward feeling oddly calm, not healed, but finished. That's different. Kaplan called the following Monday with an update. Tyler's attorney wanted to negotiate formally before litigation escalated further. We met in February at a law office downtown. The conference room smelled faintly like printer toner and old carpet. Tyler sat across from me wearing a navy suit that suddenly looked too tight around the shoulders. He avoided eye contact almost entirely. For the first time in months, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, morally. His attorney did most of the talking. At first, numbers, equity percentages, structured repayment proposals. I barely listened because I kept thinking about Christmas Eve. About the lock turning quietly inside the door, about standing there holding a pie while my brother decided convenience mattered more than loyalty. Eventually Tyler interrupted his attorney mid-sentence. "We're willing to sell voluntarily," he muttered. Kaplan glanced at me carefully. This was the moment, the one people imagine when they fantasize about revenge. But the truth is, real justice rarely feels exciting. Mostly it feels sad. I looked at Tyler for a long moment before speaking. "You spent years letting me believe you were drowning." Tyler rubbed his forehead without answering. "You invited me to Christmas dinner while planning to sell the house behind my back." Still nothing. Then finally he said something so honest it almost startled me. "I didn't think you'd ever stop helping." There it was. Not malice. Not hatred. Entitlement. The slow-growing entitlement that happens when someone keeps sacrificing for you without demanding accountability. I nodded slowly. "That's the problem," I said. Neither did I. The final settlement took another 6 weeks. The house sold in early spring. Legally, my documented financial interest forced repayment negotiations Tyler could no longer avoid. After attorney fees and debt restructuring, I recovered most of what I'd contributed over the years. Not every dollar. Kaplan warned me early that emotional debts rarely convert perfectly into financial justice. Still, the outcome changed everything. Tyler and Candace divorced 4 months later. The boys stayed mostly with her, and me? I stopped answering calls that arrived only when people needed something. That sounds simple until you've spent your whole life being the dependable one. 6 months after the settlement, I moved into a small townhouse outside Westerville. Nothing extravagant, quiet neighborhood, tiny patio with 2 flower pots I keep forgetting to water properly. For the first time in years, I bought furniture without calculating who else might need money that month. I replaced my car, started sleeping better, started saying no without apologizing first. Sometimes that's what healing actually looks like, not dramatic transformation, just the absence of constant obligation. Tyler and I speak. Rarely now, birthdays occasionally, updates about the boys, careful surface-level conversations between people who once trusted each other completely. I don't know if our relationship will ever fully recover. Some things survive betrayal, some things survive only as memory. Last month Noah called me asking for help with a school history project. Halfway through the conversation, he said something that stayed with me afterward. "Mom says you always saved everybody." I didn't know how to answer that. Because saving people sounds noble until you realize nobody asked whether you were slowly disappearing while doing it. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that love without boundaries eventually stops looking like love to the people receiving it. It starts looking permanent, expected, automatic, and once someone mistakes your sacrifice for obligation, they stop seeing the cost to you entirely. That was the real betrayal, not the house. Not the money. The assumption that I would always absorb the damage quietly because I loved them. But love should not require you to abandon yourself in installments. Family should not only remember your value when consequences arrive, and sometimes the most important thing a person can learn, especially the dependable ones, is this: being needed is not the same thing as being loved.